Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Hodson with Payroll.org. I would like to welcome you to our session today, Adapting to Changing EOR and Payroll Legislation, Strategies for Staying Ahead. The material you're about to experience is copyrighted by federal copyright law. So no portion of this webinar may be recorded, transcribed, or reproduced by any means without prior written permission from Payroll.org and Papaya Global. A couple of housekeeping announcements before we begin. During this webinar, to ask a question of our speakers or report a technical issue, be sure to enter those in the Studio Q&A panel under the video panel. If you have issues such as slides not moving or audio issues intermittently, please refresh your browser. Control plus F5 is the best approach. Close all other browser windows and your email to preserve bandwidth. You can resize or close any of the panels and use the brown icons on the left-hand side to open them back up or restore your display back to its original state. Be sure to turn off your pop-up blocker in your browser in order to participate in the polls. Now, if you haven't already downloaded the handouts from the 24-hour email reminder, you can do so now through the Handouts tab underneath the video panel. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. We have Gina Dorcelis, Director of Global Employment and U.S. Legal Counsel, and Anushka Lawali, Pre-Sales Solutions Consultant. Both are with us today from Papaya Global, and sir, we're pleased to welcome both of you. Gina, I'll turn it over to you first.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Next slide, please. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Steve. We are so excited for this important topic today, adapting to EOR and payroll legislation. Just going to hop right into the agenda. First things first, navigating the complex legal landscape. We're going to give you insights on optimizing payroll processes and how to leverage technology to ensure compliance and minimize your risk. Gaining insights that's going to help you adapt to these changing laws, and also maintaining a competitive edge in managing your global workforce. I love this quote. If you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. Navigating global regulations is a complex issue. It is essentially complex. And if you think compliance is simple, it is a risky issue. We're here today to provide you with tools to assist you in adapting to the ever-changing legislation while simultaneously providing compliance. Mark, Steve, I believe we have a poll.
We sure do. So the first poll question that we have for you today, how comfortable do you feel navigating global regulations? And here are your choices. A, I am an expert. B, very comfortable. C, somewhat comfortable. Or D, not comfortable at all. Now, many of you are already responding to the poll. That's great. If for any reason you can't respond directly to the poll, you can enter the letter of your response, just A, B, C, or D, in the group chat. That's another way to participate. We mentioned earlier your pop-up blocker can interfere with your ability to respond. I see several are responding in group chat. That's excellent. It's the reason why we put letters before the answer, so you don't have to type everything. Great. Another consideration, if you're participating through a mobile device, whether a tablet or a smartphone. Depending on your device, the poll may be opening behind the main screen. And so that's something you could check out as well on your own device. But feel free to submit through the group chat as well. Well, it looks like the poll results are slowing down. And so let's go ahead and reveal them to show everyone what we can see behind the scenes. So here are the poll results. 54% are not comfortable at all, 40% somewhat comfortable, 4% say they're very comfortable, and less than 1%. There are a few responses, but we can't see them on the bar. Less than 1% are experts. Ladies, any reactions to these poll results? Are you surprised?
This does not surprise me at all. In fact, it is encouraging. I think most people are not comfortable with navigating global regulations because it's a particularly complex issue. I would be concerned if 100% of people indicated that they were experts.
Okay, great. Well, I will advance the slide and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Now, what is an EOR? An employee of record, essentially, it allows a company to hire employees in locations where you do not have an established legal entity. For example, if you have a company that is based in New York and there's a business need that requires you to hire a worker in Japan, you would engage the services of an EOR. An EOR essentially acts as the legal employer while the end client, the company, manages the day to day activities of the worker. The EOR ensures that there's compliance with the local law, you manage HR tasks, and handle matters such as terminating global workers. Now, why would you get engaged with an EOR? Essentially because the cost of establishing an entity can be particularly high. For example, if you have 25 workers in the UK and there's a business need that requires you to have a worker in Singapore, it may make sense to outsource that function. And also, it'll ease the burden of regulatory compliance. Trying to understand the notice provisions in different countries, the severance that's required, performance improvement plans, it can be a particularly daunting task. Now, let's talk about some of the latest developments or challenges when it comes to EOR legislation. One of the biggest challenges is misclassification of workers. Misclassifying employees as independent contractors is a significant legal risk. In fact, I'm not sure if you've seen all over the media the many companies that have been fined significant penalties for misclassifying their workers as independent contractors. There's been popular cases all over the news without naming companies. I'm sure everyone has heard of them. Also, when you think about immigration rules, having global workers dealing with the many immigration laws and visa applications, data privacy laws, and GDPR compliance. That different countries have different privacy laws all around the world, and cross-border transactions involve the exchange of sensitive employee information when it comes to names, when it comes to addresses, when it comes to banking info. And each particular country has their own different privacy laws. Staying abreast of global termination laws. Terminations have to be handled in strict compliance of local laws, or you can risk significant penalties or lawsuits to the company. This can be a particularly daunting task. So you have to ensure that you're abreast with each global termination laws when it comes to notice, when it comes to severance, statutory provisions, performance improvement plans, discrimination laws. Then you also have regional challenges. When you think of if you need to terminate workers in France, in particular, employee friendly regions. Even when we think about the United States, which is an at will country, we have 50 states, which is essentially 50 mini countries. Each state has their own termination laws. And also, there's caveats when it comes to the at will doctrine. You have to ensure that the workers are complying with different tax regulations. You have to ensure that you're complying with the Family Medical Leave Act, Fair Labor Standards Act, when it comes to the American with Disabilities Act, to ensure that you provide reasonable accommodations to workers. In a nutshell, it's significantly challenging, and these are some of the significant developments. Steve, we have another poll.
We do. They come up quickly, don't they? So the second question that we have is, what is the biggest challenge you face concerning your EOR strategy? Is it A, legal and compliance issues, B, financial risks, C, operational disruptions, or D, reputational damage? So these are your choices. So we'll wait just a moment. Responses are coming in quickly. I love seeing that. I do see responses in the group chat. Thank you. Those are being recorded as well. And as the group chat goes by, sometimes it can be tricky to monitor that. I did see the question about the EOR versus PEO, and so I put that in the questions queue. So I will be asking our speakers about that later. So thank you for that. Okay, so responses are coming in. And I do see another chat. It might be difficult to say the biggest challenge. There can be more than one, absolutely. I know sometimes it's hard to just pick one, and we do understand that. So uh, it's your last chance to respond to the poll. Looks like many results have come in. Excuse me. All right, so looks like the poll responses have slowed down. So let's go ahead and reveal the results, shall we? I'm personally not surprised that legal and compliance issues received 77%. And then from there, a much smaller margin selected financial risk, 10%, 9% operational disruptions, and then 2% the reputational damage that potentially could occur. So any reaction to this poll?
I think everyone hit the nail on the head. Is legal and compliance issues are one of the biggest challenges. Of course, someone properly pointed out that there are so many challenges when it comes to EOR and global workers. One thing I will say when it comes to legal and compliance issues, when you have legal and compliance issues, you're going to have financial risks. You're going to have operational disruptions, and there may be reputational damage to your country, to your company. So legal and compliance issues, I would say number one, I think everyone hit it on the head.
Great. Well, let's continue.
Now, how do EORs make your company's life easy when it comes to navigating global regulations? They can essentially track regulatory changes and implement the necessary updates to your company's practice. Ensure that terminations are handled in strict compliance with local laws or risk penalties. I don't need to tell you that when it comes to termination, this is an animal when it comes to itself, handling and navigating global regulations, using knowledge to navigate global employment more effectively, minimizing lawsuits, and decreasing high turnover. Decreasing high turnover is an aspect that people overlook. When you think about the onboarding process for a worker, if you have a number of workers in one particular region and you have one worker, an EOR worker elsewhere, you want to make that worker feel like they're a part of the company. They want to have a smooth onboarding process. They want to have an EOR that can answer their benefits questions, their retirement questions. And these are issues that you would not know if you are not local to the jurisdiction. Therefore, so EORs can decrease the high turnover because those workers will have nice and smooth onboarding processes. And also ensuring that your data is transferred in full compliance with privacy laws. Each jurisdiction have their own privacy laws. It's a lot for one particular company to handle, especially a small business. So that's another way that EORs assist, is by ensuring that data is transferred in full compliance of privacy laws. Okay, at this juncture, I'm going to transfer the mic, the virtual mic, to Anushka to explain to you how to optimize payroll processes.
Thanks a lot, Gina. Hi, everyone. So, managing a global workforce is eventually a minefield of complexities. And part of this process does require companies to optimize their payroll process. Standardizing the payroll process across multiple countries would allow for businesses to scale without sacrificing compliance. Of course, ensuring compliance does require businesses to partner with companies and providers that leverage local payroll softwares, which are built for handling every unique country's compliance and regulations, legislative updates as well. And of course, taking into consideration global reporting needs to manage a global workforce. Every country has their own local elements, and to translate those into a global harmonized content does require some efforts on behalf of a global payroll provider. So there are some steps that businesses can consider when optimizing their payroll process, and that includes understanding employer employee contributions, also ensuring that compliance and payroll regulations are taken into consideration when processing payroll. Of course, gathering the required information per country, because some countries do require additional local data versus other countries, and of course, conducting regular audits on the business as well. So, one key aspect of this ultimately is to partner with a provider that does comply with data security standards, and that would include several different aspects of data security. A strategy businesses can use today to stay ahead is work with providers that use softwares that adhere to general data protection regulations, so GDPR. This regulation sets stringent guidelines for data protection and privacy for all individuals within the EU and European Economic Area. Of course, SOC 1 and 2 reports, which are audit reports that scope includes both business process and information technology, which allows for control and testing. Lastly, of course, the ISO certificates. Both of these focus on information security, ultimately allowing businesses to demonstrate their security posture to prospects and customers, and also ensure that privacy is adhered to when it comes to worldwide privacy laws, and of course protecting the privacy rights of consumers as well. Steve, we have another poll here.
We sure do. So our next poll question is, does your provider comply with data security standards? A, I don't know. B, they comply with a local data protection regulation. C, they comply with GDPR. D, they comply with GDPR and have certifications to back it up. So again, you can either respond directly to the poll, or I just saw group chat response come in. That's great. So of your choices, does your provider comply with data security standards? Interesting responses so far. Uh, I I will say, of the answer that's getting the most responses at this point, I would encourage you to find out if you don't know, or someone in your organization may know. I know sometimes these questions you might say, but Steve, I'm not involved in those details of our arrangement. Understand that, but would be very important. to make sure that your organization understands. To ensure that your provider is complying with data security standards. Well, I'm leaving the poll open for just a few more seconds. I see in the chat someone has changed their mind, and that's fine. that is a challenge. If you do respond to the poll and click the submit button, you're not able to change your response, but putting it in the chat is a great way to do it. All right, well, let's go to the results slide. 45% say you don't know, and that's what I was hinting at when we saw the preliminary results. Certainly, your organization will want to ensure that your provider is complying with data security standards. Then we have 22% complying with local data protection regulation, 20% GDPR with certifications, and then 11% complying with GDPR. So, ladies, any reactions to this poll?
I'm not particularly surprised that a lot of people don't know. As someone said in the chat, sometimes you don't know, but someone in the business knows, and also Steve said it earlier. Indeed, it's extremely important for everyone to know whether or not their local payroll provider or global payroll provider does adhere to all the data security standards.
Right, I'm
Great.
not surprised as well. Only thing I would say is that I think companies in general we need to do a better job of training all employees on GDPR just because receiving emails with personal information, these type of situations happen on a daily basis and you want to make sure your company's in full compliance in case if there's ever an audit. With regard to the second highest poll, I think that's pretty much the standard is most people comply with the GDPR, and that usually encompasses most jurisdictions. And if you're in California, then you're dealing with the CCPA and you have your own privacy restrictions. So I think this is pretty much representative of where it's going, but giving data privacy being such a hot issue, we need to do a better job, all companies, of getting our employees trained on general GDPR privacy protections.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Let's.
Thanks a lot, Steve. So, of course, one of the most important aspects is to leverage technology that does ensure compliance and ultimately reduces any risks within a business. Global payroll is complex and a minefield of complexities. However, the technology that underpins this doesn't have to be. It is recommended and businesses will benefit if they use an end-to-end platform that unifies both payroll and payments, allowing for seamless integrations, data audits, and execution of payments. Some key compliance steps that businesses can take today is ensuring that their data is mapped to their providers versus sending data manually via spreadsheets, emails, as Gina mentioned as well earlier. Considering privacy policies and ensuring that data protection assessments are taken into consideration within the business. Regularly assessing your data flow to your providers is important. As well, of course, training and awareness within the business. As mentioned as well by Gina earlier, it's so key for businesses to train their staff on the compliance and the risk associated with data security breaches or compliance issues related to payroll and EOR. And lastly, take the necessary security measures. Ensure that any contracts that you engage with providers in cover GDPR and different data security standards. I'll pass it back to Gina.
Now, what do? How do you adapt to these changing laws? Like, how do you apply this information to stay on top of the ever changing legislation? I think one of the most important, valuable tools is having local experts on the ground. In order to navigate global regulations, you can read it in a book, You can have external counsel indicate the proper regulations, but you need local experts on the ground. Indeed, at Papaya, we have partners in over 160 countries. For every one of our clients where they have global workers, you need people on the ground. Um, Tailored guidance for unique scenarios. You must have that. It has to be customized for each scenario, and that you can use with the assistance of the experts on the ground. Access to top of the line databases to research critical issues while minimizing costs. And what do I mean by that? Like myself, for example, I receive alerts from top of the line databases of the top 5 global employment laws, just so you can get a feel for what is going on around the world globally. And this is something very passive. It doesn't require a lot of energy, it doesn't require a lot of work, just getting constant um, email alerts of what's going on around the world. Now, I know I can imagine that we all have inboxes that are, filled with emails, but something will stick. This is a passive way to assist with adapting to changing laws. In-depth training for your team members. There has to be training for the team members because there's a lot of cross functionality across teams. And the more training, the more someone can resort to a PowerPoint and recall on an issue when they need it, then I think that that is important. Um, One of the most underrated, for sure, ways to adapt to changing laws is understanding the cultural and linguistic norms. And I think this is often overlooked that you have to understand the culture. Like for example, in my prior lifetime, I was a litigator, used to handle employment litigation. And the way I would litigate in New York, Southern District, is different from the way you would litigate in California, where there's a more laid back approach, perhaps amongst counsel. So you have to understand where you are. This also applies globally. The way you would offboard a worker in the U.S. is not the way you would offboard a worker in Italy. There's certain cultural norms that you need to be accustomed and linguistic norms that you need to be aware. And that this ties hand in hand with having local experts because the local experts will understand the culture, they will understand the linguistic norms of the region, and this will assist you in adapting to changing laws. Weekly updates from your global advisors. Hold your EORs accountable. A lot of people, they outsource it and that is it. And the only time that there is an issue, that's when you're communicating. You should be getting some type of updates on any new regulations from your advisors. And also, to the extent that your company can, having in-house subject matter and legal experts. For example, at Papaya, although we have local experts all around the world, we also have in-house employment attorneys, one in each corner of the world, in the U.S., in EMEA, in Israel, and in APAC, that have general understanding of what's going on around the world. So these are ways that you can adapt and have the tools to deal with ever-changing legislation. Now, how do you say you would maintain a competitive edge in managing your global workforce? Um, from a legal perspective, once you adapt to the ever-changing legislation and you are able or have access to an individual who has a full comprehension of global employment laws, you will seamlessly have a competitive edge over other companies and be able to fully managing your workforce from a legal perspective. And I'll let you chime in, Anushka, in terms of from another perspective and how to maintain a competitive edge in managing a global workforce.
Yes, of course. Besides, of course, understanding the global employment laws, I think a couple of tips that would help managing a global workforce and ensuring that you're always ahead of the game is to build a diverse and inclusive team, Leverage technology when you are communicating, as well leverage technology in your strategy when it comes to managing your global workforce. Implement flexible work policies, providing continuous learning and development opportunities, training, awareness within the business will always help ensuring that your workers are are effectively innovating in their process, and you are ahead of the game. And of course, implementing secure data practices, which are key to ensuring that you will be ahead of the game as well. Great. So, adapting to ever changing legislation and remaining compliant will allow for businesses to stay competitive, maintain and retain talent within a business, and mitigate risk. And ultimately, together, this is going to allow for innovation within a business. It allows for businesses also to offer um, services and offerings that are higher in quality, service, and features. In a competitive labor market, it's so difficult to retain key employees, and therefore training, developing them, ensuring that they're aware of compliance in today's labor market is key and essential, and also will allow for businesses ultimately to implement any risk strategies to stay ahead of the game. I'll let Gina chime in. Anything on your end?
I just want to add that it's vital to remain flexible in order to adapt to ever changing legislation. And that's going to be critical to your company's success. Compliance can be very daunting, but it is essential. It helps minimize lawsuits, the cost of litigation, decrease high turnover, and more importantly, focus on your core business objectives. Every company has a goal, every company has values, every institution has objectives that they're trying to achieve. And you're unable to do that if you cannot remain compliant. It is essentially a distraction. It would essentially mitigate risk to the company. And more importantly, like Anushka touched on, would assist with retaining competitive talent. If you're able to stay in compliance, if you're able to comply with your data privacy regulations, you're going to be the type of institution that companies would want to work for, that individuals would want to work for. And as the company, you have to remain flexible because the world is ever changing. We're living in a post pandemic world. Long gone are the days where individuals are sitting in cubicles. Your supervisor may be in another country. So you have to remain adapting. This is the wave of the world. And we have to, in order for companies to be competitive, you're going to have to adapt to this type of legislation and to maintain a global workforce. This concludes our discussion, and we're going to proceed with questions, which is my favorite part of the program. Just wanted to thank you so much for hearing our tools and our tips for adapting to the ever changing legislation. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn with any questions, general questions that you may have. Of course, it's not legal advice, but if I can generally assist, I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. Same here. Really appreciate everyone's time, and also really excited to answer some questions. And same as Gina, if you have any additional questions on payroll processing or legal compliance or legislative updates, how technology can be leveraged in this instance, please feel free to reach out as well.
Okay, great. It is time for our questions, and we have plenty in the queue. I and I imagine more will come in as we answer these questions. So the first question came in from Kenny. And I hinted at this one earlier in the presentation. So, is the employer of record, EOR, similar to a professional employer organization, PEO?
Uh,
What do
that's
you
a
think?
really good that's a really good question that often comes up. EOR and PEOs, employer of record and professional employment organizations, are very similar in the sense that they handle administrative functions, payroll processes, tax regulations. The main difference between an EOR and a PEO is that the EOR functions as the legal employer of the workers, whereas the PEO is a co-employer. So those are the differences between the EOR and a PEO. Now, why is this relevant? So if you are obtaining a certain number of workers, there are certain countries in which when you operate in a particular jurisdiction over a certain period of time, you're going to have to establish a legal entity because at that point you will have to make social contributions to the jurisdiction. You will have to pay taxes because you're going to have more of a permanent presence in the jurisdiction. So therefore, EOR may no longer be viable. You may want to either think of having a payroll or establishing a legal entity or functioning as a PEO where you're a co-employer as opposed to an employer of record. Also, with the EOR, there may be some challenges in terms of certain countries, and when it comes to intellectual property, you may want to use one framework versus the other. But essentially, they operate in similar fashions. It's just that one is the employer of record, whereas the other is a co-employer.
Okay, great. I'm skimming through the questions here. The next question I see comes from Remco. What are the downsides of an EOR solution?
Right. Good question. So I hyped you up and told you everything that was amazing about EORs, and EORs are indeed amazing. However, I kind of alluded to it when it comes to EOR versus PEO. It's all jurisdiction specific. There are certain restrictions. The number one, I would say downfall, but you would have to engage with an EOR that has a creative solution, is that one of the most important, I can just say from personal experience, requests of our clients is securing intellectual property rights, right? So there may be some restrictions because the EOR is the legal employer of the worker. So the worker would naturally assign their IP directly to the employer of record versus the end client. There's creative solutions for that. I'm not going to give that away, but that is one of the downsizes. Is and also with terminations, in most countries, particularly in Europe, the termination has to be conducted by the employer of record versus the client, the end client. So there are challenges there, being able to put your workers directly on your type of performance improvement plan versus the employer of record. You would have to select the right vendor to understand how to navigate that. But those are some of the downsides and some of the cost. It depends on how many workers you have in a particular jurisdiction. The cost can be high depending on the needs of your business. Certain restrictions in countries such as Germany, you can only lease workers for 18 months at a time. And then you have to find some other type of solution. So it's very jurisdictionally based. Sometimes it boils down to the control you may not be able to have over your worker, given the restrictions of a particular country.
Yeah, I also want to add that based on what Gina was saying, it's one of the sort of downsides as well is ensuring that all the workers are treated equally in terms of benefits. Sometimes through direct employment or legal entity payroll, you offer a set of benefits, policies, perhaps top ups on statutory leaves to your workers. And one key aspect of this is ensuring that that's mirrored as well on the EOR side, especially if you want to offer the same level of benefits to your EOR workers as you do to your direct employees.
I agree.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have comes from Sally. How do EOR services help reduce the risk of misclassifying workers?
Right, that's a very good question. So, misclassification workers often apply to independent contractors, misclassifying what workers that should be classified as employees at a lot of institutions classify them as independent contractors for tax reasons. It's simple, it's easier, but it can come with a host of penalties. So, EORs provide different type of services. One services that some EOR provides is they provide contracting services. Usually, in some cases, there can be some type of assessment, preliminary assessment to ensure that this worker is an indeed independent contractor, reviewing the scope of the work that they've done. Does this particular individual have their own certificates of incorporations? Do they file taxes as a business? Do they have an LLC? Creating audit defense files in the event of an audit. So there can be some, depending on the EOR, there can be some type of an assessment to ensure that this particular worker is indeed an independent contractor. And if they do fail that assessment, which often happens because there, a lot of companies want to classify workers as independent contractors. It's cheaper. You can evade a lot of tax issues. However, when it's not categorized, then the EOR will indicate that we can take on this worker, but the worker has to be an employee of the EOR. So that's one way. Also, there's another quasi EOR solution that Papaya offers, and some other, that's also called an agency of record, which is a quasi EOR. They provide assessments to ensure that independent contractors under the AR solution are indeed independent contractors. And assuming that we have all the correct information from the worker, um, and their manager, then we would shield liability for any misclassification. So there are a number of ways that EORs can assist, but traditional EORs, if this particular worker is engaging in functions that are not typical of independent contractors, they either would not take that on or should not. A good EOR would not take that worker on or advise you that they should be appropriately classified as an employee. I often find that when we do have these cases of misclassifications, usually direct employment. So if you choose the right provider, they should be able, based on the scope of function, advise you what type of worker it should be classified as.
Okay, thanks. The next question comes from Monica. Do EORs pay the employees under their FEIN and then benefits are run through the EOR rather than the organization? So a little more clarification on the role of the EOR.
Right. This is like a finance question, but in general, yes, they get paid by the EOR, and unusually in the currency of which the EOR is based. That's the whole purpose, because you want to
Yeah.
outsource these things to the EOR. That's the whole function of the EOR, is that they're handling the payroll processing, they're handling these payments, they're handling the tax issues. So they're providing you with, let's say, if you in the U.S., your W-2 forms, your I-9 forms, that's coming from the EOR.
Okay, great. Let's see. The next question, Remco says, at which point is it more favorable to switch from an EOR to a regular legal entity? Does that
Right.
That's
That's
a
happen?
a
really good question.
that,
Um, Typically, it depends on two factors. One is market viability, so the ability to open an entity in that market or country, and the number of workers from an EOR cost perspective. Because as you're growing your business in a specific country, you're
mhm,
hiring more workers. under the EOR, there will be a slightly higher cost compared to an entity setup, but then on the entity side, it might take a bit longer to set up the entity. So ultimately, when businesses are looking at this decision, you need to be able to compare sort of the future plans of that country, how you're growing within the country. Are you able to appoint a director within the country, a legal representative? Because all of these aspects are considered when registering yourself as an employer or as opening a legal entity in any country.
Right, that's exactly it. I just want to add on, like, as your business needs change, that will tell you whether you need an EOR or a pay an entity. Because let's say you started out with 4 workers in Canada and you're in a different jurisdiction, and the business needs now you're going to hire 70 workers in Canada or 200 workers in Canada, and you've gone through the process of terminating workers. You've gone through the process of putting your EOR workers on performance improvement plans. And also, your company has the infrastructure to handle. Once you get more familiarize yourself more with the rules and regulations, you may feel comfortable and think you can open an entity and can operate. I would say as your employees increase, that's when you want to consider opening an entity, because you're also risking a permanent establishment in that country. If you have 500 EOR workers in a particular region, you want to ensure that you're not providing a permanent establishment, and also with the cost, balancing that with the cost of the EOR.
Well, we have more questions about EORs. I'm sure you're not surprised. One just came in. One just came in through the chat, and so I wanted to address that one before the chat scrolls by. So, Aisa Marie, are EORs only for operating overseas then? Is that what we're talking about?
No, you can have different PEOs in different states. It's not necessarily for overseas, but the it's usually on a global perspective we discuss overseas, but no.
Okay, good. Let's see. I know we have plenty more questions here. Let me scroll through. Oh, here we go. Tammy's asking, how can we ensure data privacy compliance when dealing with employee data across multiple countries with different regulations, for instance, GDPR and local laws? It's quite a challenge, right?
Right. It's a
Absolutely.
good challenge. I'll let you handle that, Anushka.
Thanks a lot. Um, the key component here is to ensure that the provider you're working with allows for integration of data. So automatically you reduce any manual risk, any data errors, any um, privacy related challenges as well. So you want to ensure that your data is securely transferred or integrated with a local payroll software that allows for compliance, that automatically reduces risk and increases security. Anything else, Gina, you'd like to add?
Right. So, a rule of thumb, it's very challenging to handle all these different privacy laws, data regulations. There's GDPR, then each country has their own local law, especially in Europe. A rule of thumb that I would say works 90% of the time is know where all your workers are located, right? You should. Now, select the most, with the assistance of your local experts, select the most stringent data privacy law. Okay, and often it's GDPR, and then have all your workers complying with the most stringent law. Because if you do that, then they will naturally be in compliance.
Great. Let's see. Okay, I think I've already addressed that one. Good. Here we go. From Kevin. What are the common pitfalls when using an EOR service for managing a global workforce, and how can we help mitigate these risks?
Right. I think we touched on some of the challenges with the EOR is essentially IP rights. For example, usually In an employment contract with an EOR, depending on the country, the employment contract is directly between the employer of record and the worker, not the end client, right? So the IP rights that are assigned to the worker in the employment contracts, intellectual property rights, they go directly to the employer of record. End client might not be happy about that, right? So there are ways around that. We can have addendums to the employment agreement that's permissible under the jurisdiction, including in your master service agreement between the EOR and the end client or your EOR vendor, making it clear that IP rights are assigned directly to the end client. That's one of the creative solutions to those type of pitfalls. Terminations. You really need to, if anyone has ever terminated a worker, there's so much that goes into terminating just internally, right? You meet beforehand with your HR companies, you align on the times, you have to align on the ground. Now just throw another party into the mix, another EOR. So now you're dealing with time zone challenges. You're dealing with making sure there's no leaks, there's no accidents. So there has to be clear communication between the EOR, because any misstep a worker can know a day in advance that they're going to be terminated. And in countries like the Netherlands, workers can call out sick and be on sick leave for 2 years, and you will not be able to terminate these workers. So what seems simple can have significant financial consequences. So I would say clear communication with your EOR as well.
And it looks like the last question we have in the queue comes from Kenny. So does the European Union GDR supersede all the individual countries' GDR laws?
My understanding that they do not, but I would have to defer that to a specific privacy expert.
So our answer so often in payroll is that would require further research, which is certainly understandable. Absolutely. So and another very common payroll answer is it depends. I think that's what we're saying. So that
Yeah.
would certainly require more research, and we would encourage you to do that to make sure that your situation, determine your situation and how these multiple laws may interact with it. Well, thank you very, very much, Gina and Anushka. Appreciate this great information. I know EORs personally is a new topic for me because I'm not really involved in global payroll. But I appreciate this information. I know our attendees do as well. Thank you for being a great resource for this topic and these concepts. So greatly appreciate that. And we appreciate Papaya Global for sponsoring today's webinar. Now, for our attendees, you'll receive an email in about 24 hours with the link to the on-demand recording so that you can watch this webinar again. Now, there are other resources to help you. To view our Global Payroll magazine, full of global news, educational opportunities, and more, you can access it through global.payroll.org. And we want to know what you think about today's webinar. Your comments are essential to the development and continuing success of our educational offerings. So please complete the survey that will appear as soon as the webinar concludes in just a moment. With Payroll.org, you have access to our mobile-friendly e-publications and featured white papers to help you overcome the challenges of the increasingly global environment. As a global subscriber, You receive emails with the latest issue. In addition, you have access to all live and on demand webinars within the Payroll Org educational environment. Thank you so much to our speakers again for presenting this information and for your attending today. This concludes our webinar.